Welcome to another Lunch with Philip and Greg. Our friend Cirina has turned the table on us, so our guests today are Philip and Greg, and Cirina is taking us to lunch.
That's right, we're taking you to lunch today. Oh my gosh, where to start? We have such a long history together. So much about you that I'm dying.
Generally we start these things by asking the person who they are, so I'm going to ask myself, so what is it that you do, Greg?
I am a software programmer.
For who?
For us.
That would be Intelligent Assistance and Lumberjack System. Greg and I are both Intelligent Assistance and Lumberjack System, and that's what we do as our day jobs these days. In the recent past, we've been all over the place. Digital Production Bars, we created that after the DV guys finished that successful 5-year run, although it's been Larry's show now so long that I think of it as being Larry's show, not my own.
That's right.
Before that, we sold Intelligent Assistance, did training products, and before that I was actually a video producer back in Australia. The first in town to go non-linear, the first to go digital, with the Media 100 back in late 1994. In fact, I remember it was Christmas Eve, 1994. I had been a very, very good boy that year, and Santa was very generous.
Except that I had to help you find where the on button was for the Macintosh.
That's so true.
Are you serious?
No, he is completely serious. That the 8100 series didn't have an on button on, like a big red switch. They had an on button on the keyboard.
That's hilarious.
He had some Macintosh experience.
So you Intelligent Assistant, software development, Lumberjack.
Yep. I have a website, a blog website, of course. I do the Terence and Philip Show with Terry Curran, which is our, irreverent take on the industry, where the not politically correct take.
Right.
And you're the metadata guru.
And metadata, yes, metadata.guru is my website, so I guess that makes me the metadata guru by default.
Why metadata?
I really don't know why the fascination with metadata. I guess I've always been kind of an organized person, and I always made extensive log notes. Whenever I shot, I would go through all my dailies, my rushes, and make elaborate notes of, because this was tape days, so you can't just watch a 20-minute cassette to find the shot and shuttle backwards and forwards and hope that you might remember which of 20 tapes it's on. Right. And there's no visual icons in those days, so having log notes, which are metadata, of course, seemed like the right thing to do.
And it's interesting that it's disruptive. What you're doing with it is really disruptive. You're changing the way people are shooting.
Well, I've of course taken metadata and made it my own by redefining it as content metadata. I was back in Australia earlier this year and talking to one of my friends about what we were doing and how I've redefined metadata as content metadata. A lot of people are really big, and this is where most people are talking about metadata. They're talking about the technical metadata, the frame rate, the frame size, and you can do a lot with that by automating workflows using that metadata.
Right.
Then there's the content metadata, which for me is very exciting because it's what is in the shot. Describe the content, and then in distribution we have metadata about finished programs, and also coming out of the Lunch with Patrick Palmer, which I thoroughly recommend you all watch, because Patrick pointed out that one of the ways we're going to be able to handle the enormous scale of deliverables, 30, 40, 50 different deliverables in the future is to have metadata that it basically selects the cut that's appropriate based on a certain amount of metadata. And so it's an exciting time. It's still really, I think, in the infancy. And as I was alluding to, my friend in Australia said, yeah, that's pretty much what you've been talking about the whole time I've known you, which is from the early 1990s. So metadata and I go back a long way. We didn't call it that then, but we go back a long way.
But you're always one step ahead. You're both futurists, I think.
Yeah, for a little while I did define myself that way, a technologist or future technologist. Predicting the future is largely looking at the data points that exist and projecting forward. If you've got dot, 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 you can pretty much work out the next dot's going to be there. Sometimes it's there and sometimes it's there.
A lot of people can't.
No. I was going to say you can, but I think a lot of people can't.
And you also have to get a proper picture of that landscape to be able to map it. I mean, if you don't get enough data points, then you're just guessing. So I try not to get out there in fields where I don't really know what I'm talking about. I have very clear ideas of where my knowledge ends and where I go to somebody else that I consider to be more expert.
And it's really interesting in sort of thinking that you've got a fairly good history. You've got a fairly good history with Final Cut Pro, but Final Cut Pro versions 1 through 7 really didn't have anything much to do with metadata.
No. When we were trying to do things with metadata in Final Cut, so the original first cuts, we really had to pretty much take a hammer and jam the metadata into the structure that existed in a most inelegant way, which is one of the reasons why I was so enthusiastic about Final Cut Pro 10 and how it handles metadata so very, very well.
Yeah, I think with 7 and backwards, you literally had to log in the bins.
Yeah, and you were limited to a fixed number of logging fields with fixed names, whereas I think being able to set a keyword, and more importantly, being able to set a keyword on part of a clip, not just applying it to a whole clip, but multiple parts of it, that is really, really easy concept to understand and very, very useful.
So you're talking about deliverables. You have companion software that helps people with their deliverables. I mean, you have Lumberjack, but you also have Producer's Best Friend.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of that?
Well, I mean, you always look at products on the website. There's, it's not a commercial for our products. Yeah, we basically.
But we're talking about you and what you do.
We basically handle metadata from the beginning of the chain to the end of the chain between the two companies. Lumberjack, you can acquire it while you shoot. You can add transcripts. You can report all that from the output of Final Cut Pro 10 or Premiere Pro or even Final Cut Classic with Producer's Best Friend or Sequence Clip Reporter. But really, this is not about the product.
And how do you come up with those ideas?
People have needs and people talk to us about their needs. The two translation tools, obviously, we worked very closely with Apple on the 7 to 10 translation. We also independently decided that there was probably, Greg started working on 10 to 7, became 10 to 7 and then 10 to CC, simply to have a practice. The initial versions of Final Cut 10 with XML support did not have XML outs in, so we had to just start experimenting with XML out, and so Greg said, well, maybe I can get a handle on it by going backwards. Didn't even think there'd be much of a market for it.
I didn't want to release it as a product.
Really?
Yeah.
And this is why he keeps me around, because I said we need to release that as a product. It is our most profitable product of all time.
Wow. So you get ideas. How do the two of you work together? Who does what? What is your day? What are your days like?
Quite a lot more relaxed than most people's days, I think, because we are.
We've got a pretty clear separation between our tasks, our roles.
Yeah.
So we don't really work together, as in sitting side by side.
No, and we're not passing work backwards and forwards. Greg writes all the code. You'll come and consult me on some of the video background knowledge that's necessary in understanding how it should work and stuff like that. I, on the other hand, I do the relationship management with the our partner companies, marketing, the graphic design, the website maintenance. So, I do the other part of the business. So I do the other part of the business.
So you're like Wes Plate and I'm like Harry.
Yes, if you want to put the automatic duck comparison in, yeah, exactly.
There you go.
And so, I will look for Greg's opinion on a logo design or on a website layout or something like that, because he has very good ideas. But we're not in each other's pocket all the time. So people are fairly surprised when they realise that we not only are married, but we also work together and we work out of home. So we're pretty much working together most of the time.
How does that work for you guys? You ever fight?
No.
Only about insubstantial things.
That's wonderful. I think people are always surprised to learn that the company is the two of you.
Yeah.
And not a whole lot of people.
There's a really, really nice advantage about having just a small number of people, because you don't get bogged down in huge numbers of meetings, because with a team, you constantly have to have meetings to keep everybody in the loop as to what's happening, and I detest meetings with an absolute passion. Yeah.
Least favorite thing in the world. Let's back up though. How did you get started with all this? What was life like for you in the old days, in the early days?
Well, you were doing video production.
Yeah, I go back. I started asking my mother and father for a videotape recorder when I was 13, and I'm not going to identify when that was, but suffice it to say that it was far enough back that they had no idea what I was talking about. And it was an extremely expensive. I mean, I think I looked, well, this will probably date me, but I was looking very lasciviously probably at a 1/4-inch Akai color videotape recorder, reel to reel.
Oh my God, you're that old.
There's a research project for you, find out when that was current. And now, of course, I never got it, but thanks to some very generous parents' backing, I did ultimately go into my own lighting business, which was my other passion. was theatre lighting. And so I transitioned from having my own lighting kit, starting to put things into the Civic Theatre, which was reopening as a live venue, but after being a cinema for its entire life, but did not have its own equipment yet, and did not have any of the any gear. So shows that went in there would have to hire in gear from Sydney or from me, and ultimately that led to my taking the full-time position there as the technical engineer, lighting and sound, and connecting power up for rock concerts and the like.
So Greg, what were you doing during all this time?
Well, my strange background is medical research, because I majored in biology at university, then went and worked in an immunology lab, and then went back to university to get my PhD in immunology. So I was doing medical research, which is why I have a very logical brain, and it's why I have a major distrust of doctors because I've worked with them. So yeah, none of that is relevant to what I do now, which is fine.
So how did you end up doing what you do now?
By accident.
Yeah, he met me, sadly.
It's your fault.
I think it was all by accident.
After 4 or 5 years of being head technician at the Civic Theatre, I did go into my own business in video production. So that was my first. Charisma Video was formed in an era of 3/4-inch videotape recorders and quarter packs. So I experienced the tape. I never really worked with film, but I certainly experienced that sort of low-end tape era, and was very keen to transition into the modern era with non-linear. So as soon as I saw my first media composer, I sort of said, oh, this is the future, I cannot afford that. And then there was an Amiga-based NLE that was always coming next month, and still coming next month 3 years after I bought a Media 100. And although I couldn't afford it, it was the best business decision I ever made.
But Greg, you were a bit of a techie too. Didn't you tell me you wanted a computer when you were just a kid?
I had a computer when I was in high school. And that would have been it was an old Amiga 400, which was brand spanking new at the time. Atari 400, that's right, before.
Yes, we were warring. I was Amiga, he was Atari. I mean, I don't know how we got on.
How on earth could you guys ever get together at that point then? How did you meet?
Effectively introduced by a mutual friend in a bar. Another person who worked in the industry was a longtime friend of Greg's from childhood, and he knew that I was gay and knew that Greg was gay, and so basically said, well, there's one of your kind and maybe you can get a few drinks. So, and that's what started it.
And the rest, they say, is history.
And that's 25 years ago in about 2 weeks. On December the 2nd, if I remember correctly. Oh, it's about a 1 week.
And I was doing lots of computer things. Even in the lab, we didn't have a lot of support staff, and it was very strange. Our building, which was off the main campus, was almost entirely Macintosh, whereas most of the rest of the university was Windows. So we kind of had to look after ourselves, and we just sort of did our own support. So I just maintained all the computers, installed things, networked things. I love Macintosh computers. I've only been using a Macintosh since 1984, so.
But Macintosh in a research environment, that's unusual, isn't it?
Very unusual.
Why do you think they did that?
No, I think it was just a historical oddity that because our building was on a hospital campus rather than a university campus, that it was just did its own thing.
So do you ever miss working in immunology?
No, I'm happy not to kill mice. It's good.
You can tell the story about Friday Boss.
What was Friday Boss?
When you were getting towards the end of your degree and you realised that it wasn't the future of medical research is essentially spend all of your time filling out grant applications, get a grant, do the research, publish the paper, get it, and this cycle, and then Greg sort of said, well, doesn't that sound awfully like finding a customer, doing the job? Doesn't that sound like entrepreneurship rather than research? And so Greg started coming in on Fridays to the business and being Friday Boss, which was what our employee called him.
I even wore a shirt and tie. I hate wearing a shirt and tie.
Greg, I can't imagine you in a shirt and tie. You're probably very handsome, though.
Yeah, I wear t-shirts because I'm a programmer.
By this time, you guys were living together in Australia,
Yeah.
and you were developing your video business, and you were Friday Boss, bridging.
By which time I had realised that being in a small independent production company in Newcastle meant that you had long times of no work. And so I decided to leverage that and work with the local apprentice training board, and we made videos and training packs that went with the national course that had no video. So we had a second business in making and selling content, and something I thoroughly recommend that everybody do. Everyone develop something that they can own and get a recurring revenue from, because it really helps bridge out those relatively quiet times or the ups and downs of businesses.
Especially.
That's how you started getting very interested in doing training. Because that training led to non-linear editing training, starting with Media 100.
Yes, because in the meantime, I bought myself a modem. I'd been a director of the University Co-op bookshop in Australia, which is, at the time was a great business experience because, I'm turning over, hundreds of thousands or less, and they're turning over $67 million a year through 43 stores. So it really got me an understanding of how business works at that level, the relationship of a board of directors to management and to employees, and I have no real use for that now, apart from having a great understanding. But for about 7 or 8 years, I was a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors because I was director of 5 different businesses. 2 of mine, one of my parents, a community newsletter, and the Co-op bookshop. That might be one short.
That's one of the things I've always admired about you. You have a really amazing creativity, and you also have the business sense and the marketing sense, and so you have both.
That's why I subtitled my blog, as being about the business and technology of post-production.
Greg, you've been in the background very quietly coding and managing everything.
Making all my dreams come true.
Exactly. Many years, right? All of a sudden now you're doing lunch with Philip and Greg and you're out there.
I don't like being on camera, so I bristle against this, but that's okay.
Like I said, he makes my dreams come true. I have the idea and Greg comes along with me or helps me refine the idea into something he can live with.
One thing that when we're developing software, one thing that's very, very important is that we always try to come up with a user.
Yeah.
I try to think of a real person so that I'm making the software for somebody rather than for an abstract concept.
I've benefited from that over the years.
But the very, very strange thing with Lumberjack is that the person that Lumberjack was made for is here. And I've never made software for you before. I don't think, not really. So.
No, because the other tools we make are really not tools that I would normally use because they're made for integrating, apart from the translation tools, generally we integrate Final Cut Pro, Classic, Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere Pro into feature film and television workflows where they're not as ideally suited as Media Composer is. So, we do quite a nice business in facilitating that for both those apps.
So what are some of the films that you guys have worked on with your software?
Focus.
There's been some very high...
Yeah, we know for sure that our tools are worked on Focus with Final Cut 10 and Gone Girl with Premiere Pro because effectively Greg wrote a change list tool for both those productions essentially. We'd been approached to do the change list tool for Final Cut Pro 10 and we were in the process of doing that. I just casually mentioned it to Al Mooney as a footnote to another email that I was writing him and said, oh, by the way, if you ever need a change list tool, we've got your back. That's all I said. Had a call from him the next day saying, so has a little bird been whispering or was that just one total great big coincidence? I said, it's actually a total great big coincidence because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Wow.
And then there was a little bit of uncertainty because they were just at that point trying to decide whether they would write a change list tool for Gone Girl and Premiere Pro. So,
but it was really fun. I've been to both of the places where both of those films were being edited and got to know one of the assistant editors on both of them, and it's really fun actually going into a studio. It's really incredibly less glamorous than what you would think. I think that that pretty much sums up Los Angeles for me. Incredibly less glamorous than what you would think. Yeah.
But you have a creative side too. I mean, I think you have to have a creative side to be a good coder.
Yes, code is creative.
Yeah, I always used to get confused when people will say creative, I always thought artistic.
Yeah.
And I'm not artistic. But if you're in design, whether it's software design or hardware or any sort of product, design is about solving problems. So that has to be creative. Has to be.
But you're very creative because you also love to cook.
I do, but I'm not super creative with my cooking.
Now, oddly enough, the really creative insights often come from me in the cooking. I have discovered that I have a talent of being able to just in my mind know that there's a changing it's just one thing or the other would change the flavour of this dish. So we'll often do a first pass at a dish from the recipe, and wow, that's just great.
Because your cooking is amazing.
It's my hobby. And it's a good hobby to have because it's physical rather than sitting at a desk.
You cook just about every single day.
Yeah, and I'm sort of controlling the food that we eat, at least at night time. And yeah, it's something to do. Your mind wanders while you're chopping vegetables or stirring a pot or whatever, and it's a very different thing.
Having those pauses from a problem is incredibly important for problem solving, because you can nut at a problem, and Greg will testify to this, that he often nuts at a problem and then say, do you want to go for a walk? And we'll just go for about an hour walk around Burbank. And somewhere during that work, more often than not, Greg will realise what a potential path to take to solve the problem is.
You've got to step away from that computer sometimes. You can't just sit there plugging away.
You do. Now, what is it you always say? You can't solve big problems in small places. Can you repeat? Can you repeat that?
Yes, I think it comes from John Collette, a very good friend of ours in Australia. And he said, you cannot have big ideas in small spaces. So whenever we do a more strategic planning, bigger picture planning, we'll go to Coldwater Canyon or somewhere like that. Or in our new place, we'll go outside. Because
To the canyon.
Because we have an amazing open spaces. The only clear direction that I really had on the house to our estate agent was, don't fence me in. I don't want to see houses all around and be in that suburban environment.
I think a lot of your friends were surprised that you were looking at homes that were secluded in the mountains, away from other people, because you're in the middle of everything all the time in the business.
Well, we're not really. That's the thing is, our business is very self-contained. As long as we have an internet connection and some power and a computing device, we've pretty much got our business with us. So that leaves us free to go and spend a little time in Europe either side of IBC, or to travel within the United States to do that. So we can live remotely because we don't really come into the city that often. In Burbank, yes, I come to my chiropractor and singing teacher, but I can sing the James James Presley is an excellent chiropractor, and April Lindsay is an excellent singing teacher, both in Burbank, and you can find them both.
Okay, singing. Tell us about the singing. Come on.
That's like discovering a limb late in life, that you've got an extra limb late in life. Long story short, at NAB 2014, I ended up in a situation with some friends who it got to a point where not singing would have been a bigger loss of face than singing incredibly badly. So I went ahead and sang incredibly badly. And I guess people who know me would probably work out I'm not very good on doing something incredibly badly. And so I thought I just
Is that true, Greg? Is he a perfectionist?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. I'm more, not so much perfectionist as 70% tile.
Yeah, a little bit type A maybe. Yeah.
Type A, there you go. But also, I think you care about what you do. So here you are, it's 2014, and you're in this group, and they're all doing karaoke, right?
Yeah, and with the whole thing with karaoke is, it really, nobody cares whether you sing well or badly. It's to have fun together. And of course, people who like singing like it because they sing well, and so I feel they have an advantage. But so I sang badly. Chose a bad choice, really bad choice of song. West End Girls. It's not a beginner's song.
That was my fault.
But you were also, I think you were petrified to sing in public.
Oh God, yes. I had never in my entire life sung in public. I think the last time I sang in front of anybody was when I was an exchange student in Japan at the age of 17, and I think I got the impression that my singing didn't go down well with my friends, and so that's probably why I got in the message in my brain that I can't sing. but like everything, it's just a matter of practice. You know, in the 18 months since, and I've been a good student. I've practiced fairly diligently, and now I'm comfortable to throw a song into a presentation about metadata. You can hear my content metadata song. You can find it on YouTube.
Should put a link up. You do your own words to these songs.
That's one of the joys. Yeah, it's one of the fun things. Is not only can I sing songs that I would want to sing, but I can throw my own lyrics on it. So yes, I've changed Pure Imagination into content metadata. I've changed The Impossible Dream into The Impossible Song and did that at a concert early in the year. I took Everybody Wants to Rule the World for a recent concert and turned that into Everybody Wants to Learn to Sing. So, and of course to the tune of Candyman, there's a lumberjack can coming up in the future.
Just what the world needs, another lumberjack song.
But isn't that what you do every day? You take things that exist and you make them better, and you change them and you develop them and you create something that's viable for other people. I mean, it all goes together.
It does, yeah. I've always felt that I have multiple projects going on. It's almost like I try desperately to focus everything on one business, and everything that we do is focused on metadata in one way or the other than the cooking. You know, the cooking is the only thing that we do that's not in some way related to metadata. And that's why, you know, it's not available yet, but we are working on a cooking show called The Semi-Serious Foodies, which is really about taking restaurant food and cooking it at home and showing how easy it is to prepare food for yourself that is of restaurant quality and a fraction of the price.
What do you think of the beans? They've got some sugar in them, don't they? I've never had black beans with sugar in them.
They're a little bit sweet for me. I'm not a fan.
Well, I know I look forward to your meals, and I always look forward to the pictures of your meals, and I look forward to what I call the Greg version of these recipes, because you're always changing them, right?
Yeah, I think if I had a particular food style, it would be something like, I like to be able to take something that's really kind of traditional and expected and make it better, elevate it a little bit, you know, use good ingredients and have something that tastes good. Because a lot of these really simple things that have been around for a long time, these foods have been around for a long time because they really work, but they get taken for granted or they get abused in some way. Although I don't think I would ever make green bean casserole because I think there's almost no redeeming feature.
Now I cannot see you at Thanksgiving with green beans and mushroom soup and
Alton Brown did elevate that one, but even so, yeah.
No, all your food is very healthy, which also reminds me, you look better now than you did when I met you 8 years ago. What have you been doing?
Well, I started swimming, and in the same way that even though I swam extensively as a teenager, competitively even, I haven't obviously in the interim period. So when I got back in the pool, like my singing voice, I was appalling. You know, I could go up and back and then stop and huff and puff and go up and back and do that 8 times. Now I can do that 80 times and not be huffing and puffing at all. So obviously pushing that and slowly incrementally improving with swimming.
You also keep track of what you do too. Every day you're keeping track of what you eat at Calorie Count or something like that, right? There's a program that you use?
Yeah, I've changed to MyFitnessPal, but yes, because the Calorie Count didn't have a particularly good iOS environment. But yeah.
Were you thinking about while you're swimming, that's a thing where it allows the mind to wander, so it's...
Oh no, what I was going to say is that one of the things that I've realised is you cannot do anything new unless you're prepared to suck at it for an extended period of time.
Ah.
Because you can't. You know, you are never going to start something brand new and be really good at it straight off. If you are, I'm insanely jealous of you and I hate you.
But you're never content with good enough. Well, it's got to be really good, and I think that's what drives both you and Greg, right?
It has to be good. It doesn't have to be perfect, and because I think it's true that perfection is the enemy of the good. If you will only do that which is perfect, you're going to avoid doing a whole lot of good stuff while you wait for that almost impossible perfection to be able to come upon.
Were you thinking about while you're swimming, that's a thing where it allows the mind to wander, so it's. I have a saying for this: if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Which sounds stupid, but what it literally means is that if something is worth doing, then you can do it, and it doesn't have to be absolutely perfection sorry, Mr. Jobs, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Good enough. What's that other one? The enemy of
the perfect, the good is the perfect. Yeah.
Oh, is that what you just said?
That's what I just said. Yeah. And but I think even with Steve Jobs, I mean, and Apple as a company, the iPhone is released when it's ready to go,
right,
not when it's perfect.
Right. You know, oh yeah, that's true.
You know, the iPhone now at Generation 9 is not the same device that it was without apps.
That's true.
In version 1.
That's true, and in fact most of what I do with my iPhone now, which is mostly non-native apps, would have been impossible on the first iPhone. So the first iPhone for me probably wouldn't have worked.
It's amazing to see how far we've come with technology.
Even I was speaking to one of the people that was on the original development team for Final Cut Pro when it was started at Macromedia, and saying, you know, how much of the original planned features are now implemented in Final Cut 7, I think 6 at the time. He said, oh, about a third. So if they had waited for everything to be developed, Final Cut would have been released after it was killed. We have to get, I mean, Brad Wright, another software developer, says that, you know, ship it and then react quickly. And iterate very quickly for anything that comes up or any features that can be added.
You know, you're putting a new spin on this for me because I've wondered why sometimes things aren't perfect when they first come out. And as a user of this technology, it can be a little bit annoying, but I also understand that, thank heavens I have it, right? I'm glad to have it, even if it's not perfect.
You kind of have to ship something so that you can get it into users' hands and find out what users want, because it's not really possible, whether it's, you know, a single programmer or a small team. It's not possible to picture every use case. So, although it was very controversial, I think that what they did with Final Cut 10 was the right thing. They released something that was very incomplete, but the team knew it was incomplete, and they had to get it into people's hands before they could have, you know, particularly some of the big features like multicam. You know, they really needed feedback on multicam before making decisions, because once you start making decisions, you often can't backtrack, which was why multicam in Final Cut 4 or 5, whatever, was so bad. Multi-clips in the old Final Cut was horrendous.
Because they were bolted on.
Really, really bad. Whereas with Final Cut 10, I think multicam is just wonderful.
I'm still blown away every time I look at a multicam project, though, because years ago there would have been no way for us to do that. You remember having to hand sync things, manually sync the audio in your clips?
And we've got a lumberjack customer who was making things way too... Okay. We've got a lumberjack customer that was making things way too complicated. He was shooting double system with multiple cameras, and he was making synchronized clips that he then put into the angles of the multicam. And there's no need to do that, because you can just make a multicam, provided you name everything correctly. You can make a multicam that's got multiple clips, all on the same angle.
He's doing compound clips because with the GoPro they only run about 8.5 minutes or before they create a new file to keep it within the full.
So what are you most proud of?
I think I'm probably most proud of Lumberjack. I think because Lumberjack represents a real step forward. It's relatively slow in uptake, but I think that's important. That's expected because we're changing people's workflows, and nobody voluntarily changes their workflow. You know, the Final Cut 10 experience was certainly made that very obvious, that nobody voluntarily changes their workflow. But Greg, what about you?
I have no idea. I really don't know. I've probably answered that question before, but I just don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that we've done. I mean, I'm really, you know, we got the translation tools way better than ever anyone expected we could. You know, the two versions of XML are so very different that to get a good translation between them is way more complicated than most people even to this day think.
Yeah, it was never going to be perfect, but it ended up better than anybody expected.
So answer the question about the future. Are you still rolling?
Yeah.
What's going to happen in the future? I'm excited about self-driving cars. I think that's a very important thing. I'm excited about 3D printing. I think that's a game changer. What other future things?
Part of the problem with trying to predict the future, and this is a rough question for everybody, so it's only fair that it be thrown back at me.
Yes.
Self-driving cars will be a big thing. 3D printing will be a very big change. But the most important change is one that we don't see coming. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we've done. I mean, I'm really, we got the translation tools way better than anyone expected we could. The two versions of XML are so very different that to get a good translation between them is way more complicated than most people even to this day think.
What is it?
I don't know. It's the one we just don't see coming. I mean, in 1985, who would have known that we were going to be doing online banking, that we would have 4K cameras we could put into a bag? I mean, the whole digital transition.
Yeah. Well, yes, the internet changed the world. Yeah. Well, computers and the internet changed the world.
Yes, yeah. And we haven't even begun to see that. Even in just with where we're going to go with Lumberjack, there's so much technology that we have to ultimately incorporate that makes it automatically transcribe the speech in the interviews, for example, and extract keywords from that, make the keyword ranges for Final Cut Pro 10, put that into put that speech into a notes field in the transcript.
Right.
These technologies, and it generates descriptions of the content automatically. These technologies exist; they just don't exist in the content metadata space yet, and that's. I want to change that future. But in broader sense, the biggest historical change was really what we talked about, was the internet, that ease of communication. I am here today because I bought that modem I referred to a few minutes ago. Right. The reason is that connected me with other Media 100 users. That's why I bought it. But it also connected me with the After Effects community, because I was very interested in After Effects in that time. I realized that I wasn't the odd one out. There are at least 1,000 other odd ones like me in another place, and I jokingly say that I lived in .com for a lot longer than I lived in the United States. But so that led me to learn from all these other people, and I was generous with learning. When I would learn something, I'd be happy to share that knowledge rather than keep it to myself. And even if I was only learning it a week ahead of somebody else, everyone thought that I knew my stuff. And so I got this reputation of knowing my stuff, and because I learned from everybody else and shared generously.
But you also had that background in training, so therefore you were in a good position to be able to create an explanation for a novice user.
Yeah, it's true. And then of course we did a Media 100 Editor's Companion, which is a print book that is attempting to make an interactive index, indexed on every word. Yeah, and it stood up on its own stand simply because there was never enough room in an edit bay. And so it was to answer the question about how do I do this right now?
Because there were a lot of workarounds with Media 100. Yeah. It was a very, it did what it did, but there was a lot of simplicity to it, and there were ways of doing things that weren't sort of the mandated, not a feature, but there was a way of...
The first tutorial I ever put onto the Worldwide User Group, Ron Linderboom's first site, was on how to use the zoom transition part way to make a picture-in-picture effect, which it lacked at the time.
I did like the Media 100 though. It was really simple.
Well, you understood Media 100, but you never understood Final Cut, and you now...
had two viewers, and that confused me. It's true. Why do you need two viewers? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know.
But you do find that you like Final Cut 10 for much the same reason as you like...
Yeah, Final Cut 10 reminds me of Media 100 more than any other NLE, I guess. And it's probably not true, because if you think about it, Media 100 had 2 tracks and a transition track. So that's so not like the magnetic timeline.
Somebody was saying that there's some statistics that Apple put out that are predicting the demise of the tablet, and I totally disagree. How do you feel about that?
Why do you need two viewers? It doesn't make any sense. I don't know.
I'm somewhat surprised about how important the tablet is and how much use I make of a tablet, because frankly I didn't think we would. We got them originally for Solar Odyssey.
And we mainly got them in order to be able to do logging with Lumberjack.
Exactly, yes. And so it didn't really have any additional use. Now I find that when I travel to a conference, I'm only taking an iPad. And the only reason we needed to take any computer to Europe was to manage media. Unfortunately, I had the Nexto in Australia, and it wasn't as reliable. And for a lumberjack purpose, it doesn't record the time zone, so it became problematic. Which is why with Narbox, this great new offloading tool that's a Kickstarter project, I've been working with the guy who's doing the metadata side of it, making sure that he does the metadata right.
Good.
I think that while ever Tim Cook sees the use for an iPad, and that's a personal use, that there will be iPads made. Because he's an iPad guy.
Yeah.
My 9-year-old granddaughter is making movies using her iPad mini and iMovie.
Isn't that wonderful?
I think it's amazing. And she loves it. Loves it.
There's all these, there's these great videos of a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old in front of an iPad just interacting with it. And then you give them a magazine and it doesn't work the same way as an iPad, and it's very frustrating. I love that.
How would you like to do something like Steve Jobs did and change the world with something you invented?
I'd love to. My two biggest heroes have always been Walt Disney and Steve Jobs. And Walt died long before I got close enough to meet Steve Jobs. I mean, I know a lot of people who work closely with him, so we were one degree of separation. I kind of look forward to being berated by him one day. But But yes, certainly those two people were the biggest influence on my life. As a boy, I had detailed plans for a Disneyland in Australia.
Wow.
How about you, Greg? Who were some of your heroes?
I don't know. I don't know. I should have thought about that before.
No, you didn't know I was going to ask it.
What I haven't ever had is a mentor, though.
Right.
It's because you're smarter than just about everybody you meet. How can you find a mentor when you're the smartest person in the room?
I always felt that there were things I needed to know. In business, it's like I know I'm not doing something about marketing, but nobody would ever tell me what it was that I wasn't doing or what I could do different on an actual day-to-day level, rather than more marketing. Yeah. Okay, so what am I going to do at 10:30 tomorrow morning to make that happen? And I never had that sort of mentor aspect going.
Why is that? Is that because of the internet?
I don't really know.
Because I do believe that's a problem for a lot of young people getting into our business. They don't have mentors anymore because they're learning by themselves. They go through film school, but that doesn't teach you how to make films.
No.
It really doesn't.
You need to have an apprenticeship where you're sitting beside somebody who really knows what they're doing. And that's become formalized in corporate situations, because oftentimes when you are promoted to a position, there'll be a person who's previously held that position who you can rely on for advice. So you're not just sort of thrown in at the deep end.
Are you glad you went into this business?
I'm glad we've ended up where we are in this business.
What would you do if you weren't doing this?
Something else?
Something else? I don't know. I'm looking forward to at least another 30 or 40 productive years. So, I think lumberjack and metadata is good to keep my interest and build what we want to build. It's good for 10 or 12 of those. So, yeah, I'm not sure what comes onto the next act. Maybe something food related.
Yeah.
Let's travel the world and make food shows, and that'd be fun.
Yeah.
So this is the holiday season. Thanksgiving's tomorrow. What are you thankful for?
Oh, so much.
Yeah, it's very important to have that sense of gratitude. And it's a shame that a lot of people only think about it once a year, but it's having a sense of gratitude is very mentally healthy, and it's worth doing. It's worth practicing more than just one day a year.
I watched Inside Out yesterday, and what came to mind when you said that was joy.
Yeah, I like
You
that.
have a sense of gratitude. I think that brings joy into your life, right?
Yeah. I'm thankful that my mum's health is on the mend again after a very rough year. I'm thankful that I've actually had the chance to talk to my relatives and start that family history project. I'm thankful that I've learnt to sing this year, and I'm having a lot of fun with that. I'm thankful that I had a minor operation during the year and I'm much more comfortable as a result of that, and I thank the doctor for that too.
Yeah, the Family History Project. That's something for the future, because I think that really has an opportunity to not change the world, but really change people's personal relationships within families, to learn more about who their relatives are, and as time goes on and people pass on, to have a connection back to family history.
Well, don't you think we've lost our traditional storyteller because we don't sit around the fireside en famille anymore, right? I mean, who was it? Some recent statistics have shown that many Americans aren't even buying dining room tables anymore. So what you're doing there and teaching people how to do the family histories is important.
And for the last 4 years, I've been very thankful for Final Cut Pro 10. It's because of Final Cut Pro 10 and the need to translate that we can afford to buy a house, which is another thing that I'm very thankful for. So, yeah, lots to be thankful for this year.